All right, let's just jump straight into it. Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're taking a really deep, extended dive into what is honestly one of the most delightfully bizarre and highly self-aware literary universes out there. I want you to think about how many times you've read a fantasy novel or maybe watched an anime where the creator just absolutely tortures their characters. You know what I mean, right? They give them these deeply tragic backstories, they completely destroy their peaceful hometowns, they put them through impossible emotional ringers, and usually it's all just for a cheap plot twist or to make the story feel a little bit more dramatic. Now, I want you to imagine if those exact characters could somehow look back through the pages, find the actual person who wrote their misery, and fight back. Literally fight back. If you are someone who loves theatrical anime vibes, heavy fourth wall breaking, and stories that actively, aggressively rebel against their own creators, you are in the exact right place today. We're going to explore a narrative where the lines between the author and his creations don't just blur a little bit, they completely shatter, and it leads to a hilarious, utterly absurd, and honestly surprisingly profound showdown. So buckle up, get comfortable, because we are unpacking the ultimate metafictional courtroom drama.
Okay, let's set the scene. Picture this. You are just out for a leisurely stroll through your hometown. You're minding your own business, the sun is shining, the weather is perfect, and suddenly, out of absolutely nowhere, someone screams this at the top of their lungs, right in your face. Now, kisama, for those who might not know, is a highly aggressive, incredibly disrespectful Japanese term for you. It's basically fighting words. In this story, our author, a guy named Ed, or Edwin M. Bozzi, finds himself violently ambushed in broad daylight with this exact scream. But here's the kicker. He isn't getting mugged by random street thugs. Not at all. He is being cornered by his very own anime-inspired creations. It is literally the ultimate writer's nightmare brought to flesh and blood reality. Just think about the sheer, overwhelming panic he must feel in this exact moment. The dread is palpable. I mean, he literally wrote them into existence. He sat at his keyboard and gave them their tragic backstories, their insurmountable traumas, and their incredibly overpowered, godlike magical abilities. And now, they are standing right in front of him, they know exactly who is responsible for all their suffering, and they are incredibly, terrifyingly angry.
Section 1. Enter the meta-narrative, setting the scene with the Dragon Emperor. To truly appreciate the scale of this real-world ambush that Ed is dealing with, we have to kind of take a step back. We need to understand the bizarre, highly comedic tone of the universe that Ed operates in. Ed actually starts off by presenting this quick story within a story to his in-universe commentator, a character named Emma, just to set the stage for what kind of world this is. So it goes like this. First, a young boy comes home from the cinema. He is completely enamored with the movie he just saw, and he's passionately praising dragons to his dad, Mr. Reyes Kubalo. Now, second step, the father vehemently, stubbornly denies that dragons exist. He doesn't just politely disagree with his kid, he gets visibly irritated. He aggressively scolds his son, completely writing him off as a fantasizing fool for believing in silly fairy tales. Fast forward to step 3. The very next day, this deeply arrogant dad goes shopping. He's probably still internally mocking his foolish son. Suddenly, he literally bumps into a strange man dressed in full, elaborate cosplay. And this stranger immediately starts asking highly suspicious, totally invasive questions about the dad's life insurance policies and his last will and testament. I mean, the sheer absurdity of a random stranger inquiring about your life insurance in the middle of a grocery run is pure comedic gold. And finally, step 4. The stranger lets out a sinister laugh and reveals himself as the legendary Dragon Emperor, instantly transforming into a towering, terrifying dragon right on the spot with blazing red eyes. The comedic tension and how that builds up to this magnificent reveal is just fantastic. Now, what's really interesting about this hilarious little sequence is that it introduces a core law of Ed's universe. It's known as the rule of see you around the corner. This isn't just some funny coincidence for the sake of a joke. It is an actual, defined physical phenomenon in this literary reality. It literally means running into the exact thing you just vehemently swore didn't exist. By loudly and arrogantly insisting dragons were nothing more than childish fairy tales, the dad literally summoned the Dragon Emperor, or a demon known as Abasam, straight from 666 feet below the earth. It's incredible. This brilliantly establishes the absolute rule of irony that governs Ed's writing as a literary device. In this world, irony is basically gravity. If you say something definitively won't happen, the universe will bend time and space to immediately make it happen, purely just to spite your arrogance.
Section 2. The creator gets ambushed. Fiction bleeds into reality. So, keeping that absolute rule of cosmic irony in your back pocket, we return to the real world. Ed is taking a pleasant walk through town, and he's just musing to himself about how he can artificially inject more cheesy one-liners and unnecessary melodrama into his stories, simply to rake in more cash from his readers. He is being completely arrogant, totally unaware of the metafictional consequences of his own writing. And this is all happening even as his internal commentator, Emma, explicitly warns him that a heavy dose of divine punishment is about to rain down on his head. And boy, does that divine punishment arrive. It comes in the form of 3 spectacularly disgruntled Yormul men. First up, we have Zan, also known as Izan Nightbane from the story Dreamweaver. You'll spot him rocking messy hair and piercing golden eyes. Then there is Ryu from Dragon Zone, sporting blue hair and a famously short, highly aggressive temper. You do not want to mess with Ryu. But the most fascinating of the bunch, that has to be Alael. He's a silver-haired, ageless entity from a story that Ed hasn't even bothered to finish yet. I want you to really think about the sheer existential dread of being an unfinished character. You were left in a literal void by your creator, just hovering in narrative limbo without a complete character arc or proper ending. The psychological torment of that is immense. So these characters haven't just randomly stepped off the page, they have come with a deeply personal, burning grudge against their creator.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how these literary creations actually manifested on a physical sidewalk. It is all thanks to a concept called universal transliteration. It is an incredibly powerful metafictional phenomenon. It actively allows fictional characters to cross the rigid boundary of reality to interact with, or in this specific case, completely overpower their author. And make no mistake about it, they are insanely, overwhelmingly powerful. Olele casually mentions to a terrified Ed that it would take him exactly 0.00000023592 microseconds to close the physical distance between them. I mean, try to even wrap your head around that level of speed. It is utterly incomprehensible. Ed is just a normal human guy with a laptop. He is entirely outmatched by the literal demigods he himself designed. In the absolute blink of an eye, using the very overpowered combat abilities Ed gave them just to make his book sell better, they easily kidnap their own creator.
Section 3, Court of Literary Sciences, the Ultimate Authorial Trial.
Exactly 2 hours after being totally abducted on the street, a bucket of freezing cold water violently splashes across Ed's face. He wakes up, tied firmly to a pole, and he is formally introduced to the Court of Literary Sciences. Now, this is an absurd, completely mock legal trial where the author is going to be judged, prosecuted, and sentenced by the very people he invented. It is wild. Ole, the unfinished, highly hostile character who is suffering from that existential limbo we talked about, appoints himself as the judge, naturally. Ryu, who is absolutely vengeful and famously hot-headed, steps up to be the prosecutor. But the real emotional gut punch of this whole situation is the defense attorney. Ed looks desperately over to Zahn. Zahn is his favorite character, the protagonist he spent the most time crafting. Ed is totally expecting to be saved by him, but Zahn is purposely scoring own goals. Zahn points out, with this chilling, deadpan smile, that Ed's story needlessly killed off his beloved grandpa and forced him into a miserable life as a hated half-breed outcast. Imagine the emotion of being an author, staring at your absolute favorite creation, only to realize he actively despises you. Zahn is technically supposed to be defending Ed, but he hates his guts so much he is actively trying to ensure a swift, brutal conviction.
Ed, as you might expect, is understandably panicking. He loudly complains that this entire courtroom setup is completely unfair, massively biased, and lacks even a single shred of actual justice. And in response to that, Judge Alili drops this absolute masterpiece of a quote. Listen to this. It goes without saying that it's their own stupid fault if their lawyer holds a grudge against them and wants them convicted. The sheer theatrality of this moment is brilliant. O'Leary literally cites the Geneva Convention right before this, grandly claiming everyone deserves a fair and balanced trial, only to immediately throw the entire rulebook out the window with a perfectly straight face. He pauses, lets the sheer hypocrisy hang in the air for a second, and then just proceeds anyway. It perfectly highlights the total absence of real-world justice and the outright mockery of legal proceedings happening in this bizarre, vindictive literary court.
So, what exactly is the great Edwin M. Bosey actually on trial for? Well, he isn't being prosecuted for a real-world crime like theft or jaywalking. No. He is standing trial for the ultimate, unforgivable authorial sin, writing off characters' existences as a means for personal entertainment. This carries massive, massive philosophical weight. Ed is essentially being prosecuted for playing a cruel god. He tortured his creations with endless, grueling melodrama. He killed off their loved ones, and he subjected them to immense physical and psychological pain. And for what? All just to sell a few more paperbacks, get some cheap attention, and make a quick buck.
Think about how many incredibly popular authors in modern culture are guilty of this exact crime. How many writers have devastated their fan bases by putting their beloved heroes through absolute hell just for the sake of a shocking chapter ending? We all know a few, right? Well, in this specific courtroom, that kind of narrative exploitation isn't just frowned upon, it is a capital offense. So the crucial point is when Prosecutor Rue steps up and begins reading from a massive, scrolling list of 68 total charges. And you really have to treat the reading of these charges with the absolute gravity of a real criminal indictment. Because to the characters, this is their actual lived trauma. But to us, the audience, it is a hilarious laundry list of the absolute most overused anime and fantasy cliches in existence. Let's go through some. Charge 1. The decimation of an entire race of dragons. Just a casual genocide to start the day. Charge 2. Murdering the parents of main characters because, heaven forbid a fantasy hero actually has a supportive, living family, right? Charge 3. Forcing characters to live out in grinding, inescapable poverty, unable to afford rent simply because it builds quote-unquote character struggle. Then there's Charge 5. Making their trusted alter egos become the ultimate final boss. Ed tries to defend this one by claiming it's a really cool, edgy plot twist, but Zan immediately fires back that it is incredibly cliched and practically gives the characters severe identity crises. And of course, we cannot forget Charge 68, the premeditated abduction of royalty. They are literally putting a man on trial for his life because he relied on lazy, copy-paste writing tropes to meet his publishing deadlines. It's amazing. But out of all 68, it is Charge 4 that really strikes a deeply personal nerve with the prosecution, forcing male characters to fall for tsunderes. Now, for those unfamiliar with the trope, a tsundere is an anime character who is initially incredibly hostile, mean, sometimes physically abusive, and just totally cold, but eventually warms up over time to show a loving side. The characters are completely exhausted from dealing with them. It's draining. So, in response to their complaints, Ed hilariously threatens to rewrite their romances using yanderes instead. Now, a yandere is a completely different beast entirely. They start off incredibly sweet, loving, and innocent, but quickly become obsessively, violently, and terrifyingly unhinged about their romantic interest. They will happily destroy anyone who gets in their way. Ed casually threatens to make these terrifyingly obsessive yanderes their new guardian forces. The sheer terror a yandere instills in anime culture is legendary, and the moment Ed makes this threat, all three of these incredibly powerful, supernatural, godlike heroes immediately freeze up in total fear and very politely decline the offer. The fact that literal demigods who can move in microseconds are visibly terrified of a crazy anime girlfriend trope is absolutely spectacular comedy. Section 4. Mutually Assured Destruction, the author's final play. After thoroughly weighing all 68 charges, Judge Olale forcefully slams his imaginary gavel and finds Ed guilty on all counts. There's no escaping it. Now, the court must decide how to actually execute him, and they are throwing out some truly wild, horrifying suggestions. They're talking about dropping him headfirst off a jagged cliff, locking him in a rusty guillotine, or even hanging him upside down over a churning sea of starved piranhas. The pacing really slows down here as it looks very, very bleak for our captured author. But Ed rapidly shifts from a terrified captive right back to an arrogant, manipulative creator. He realizes he still holds one ultimate trump card. He calmly appeals to their warrior honor. He points out that mighty heroes like them simply aren't the type to slaughter an unarmed civilian without granting one single last request. Reluctantly, they agree to his terms. So, what is Ed's final request? He asks for the privilege to choose exactly how he dies. Specifically, he wants to be thrown into a roaring, active volcano. But there is a very, very specific catch. He demands to be thrown in with all of his personal effects, including, and heavily emphasizing, every single physical copy of the books he has ever written. Let's move to and see how this builds into an absolute genius survival paradox. We need to walk through this logic slowly to truly appreciate the brilliant checkmate the author just pulled off here. The character's original plan was straightforward and incredibly simple. Legally execute the author, end their lifelong narrative suffering, and finally gain their long-awaited independence from his terrible writing. But Ed's counter-threat is an absolute masterclass in mutually assured destruction. Think about it. If they honor his final request and throw him into the boiling volcano with his personal effects, his physical books will instantly burn to ash. If the books burn, the original source material and the stories themselves are permanently destroyed in the real world. And if the stories are destroyed, The characters whose entire existence relies completely on those very words are entirely and irreversibly erased from existence. Poof, gone. Ed basically looks his incredibly powerful supernatural kidnappers dead in the eye, flashes a sinister, arrogant smile, and essentially says, "If I go down into the fire, you are all coming with me."
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the undeniable checkmate. You can vividly imagine the visible frustration, the gritted teeth, and the crushing defeat appearing on the characters' faces as they realize they have walked right into a massive trap that is entirely dictated by their own lore. Judge Alele, completely deflated, utters this defeated quote, "We really underestimated you. You got us there. Zan, release him." They realize they cannot kill the host without killing the parasite. They have no choice. They reluctantly untie their heavy ropes, and the three formidable characters vanish into thin air, fleeing the scene back to their fictional realms before Ed can do any more petty damage to their ongoing storylines. Ed not only survives, but he completely regains his inflated ego. And how exactly does he celebrate surviving a literal brush with death? By immediately launching into a maniacal, highly petty plot to exact revenge on Emma, his profoundly unhelpful in-universe commentator. He aggressively threatens to deport her to Arabia in a wooden tomato crate for the upcoming episode 4. The sheer pettiness to wrap up this incredibly high-stakes narrative arc is just bursting with high energy and comedy. Which leaves us with a final, truly thought-provoking question to ponder long after this explainer ends. So what does this all mean? Who actually holds the ultimate power in the realm of fiction? Is it the creator, the flawed human who physically writes the story, holds the delicate manuscript hostage, and acts as the ultimate architect of reality? Or is it the characters, the ones who actually endure the trials, who capture the audience's hearts, who bring the sprawling worlds to life, and, at least in this brilliant meta-universe, can literally step straight out of the printed page to put their own god on trial? This story gives us a deeply fascinating, endlessly hilarious, and surprisingly philosophical look at the incredibly complex, often antagonistic relationship between art and the artist. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive explainer. Keep analyzing those storylines, keep questioning the tropes in your favorite books, and above all, make sure you always treat your imaginary creations with a little bit of respect, just in case they ever figure out how to cross over into our world. See you next time.